years ago, they sustained some damage because the atmosphere was much more thick than had been indicated. And, of course, there are changes in the magnetic field of Jupiter, which is more than double what it used to be, and Uranus and Neptune are already increasing. So, obviously, the whole solar system is undergoing enormous change. And
I was talking to our good friend Brooks Agnew,
yes,
and he was giving me some information about the Voyager went out, and, all of a sudden it just busted out of the heliosphere much faster than they ever expected, and they're going, wait a second, and they're finding out actually the heliosphere is actually becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, which is allowing us to be bombarded with these cosmic rays and other rays we're not used to, which are, again, hitting the Earth, because we don't have that shielding effect of the heliosphere that was there.
Right.
And, coming through the big holes in our magnetic fields, and then you add up this alignment with galactic plane, that is going to be very interesting. I don't know exactly what's going to happen there either, but definitely we are going to have some effects from that event.
Yes. Well, the Mayans, in that statement they issued a couple of years ago, we're talking about an awful lot of stuff like that. They'd say, for instance, that the Earth's physical pole will shift as well as the magnetic pole, and that some of this radiation from the sun might cause the underlying magma underneath the core, between the core and the outside of the Earth, to become more liquid, and therefore the crust would tend to float around more easily. And needless to say, some things come into play there, like the ice sheet in the Antarctic, as we all know, is not exactly centered on the South Pole. It's to one side. Mm-hmm. So if the crust of the Earth, begins to float more easily on the magma underneath, well, if the magma becomes more fluid, there's a very great likelihood that that massive ice sheet in the Antarctic would slide in directly under the South Pole. And, of course, that would pull the whole crust with it, and that would be a geographical pole shift, with catastrophic consequences, if it happened quickly. So that's what the Mayans are saying, that there would be a magnetic pole shift which might precipitate a physical pole shift, and for a time there'll be no magnetism. And they say that it might take about 20 hours for this to happen. And they also suggest that during this polar shift there will be 30 hours of darkness, I think, or a blindness. That's not due to the lack of light. It's just something that we will go through. And, obviously, if you're not aware that something like this is happening, you're going to complete panic. They just tell us, to sit quiet and not get unduly upset, because it will pass after a relatively short period of time. There's a lot of things like that that are in the Mayan prophecies, that have nothing to do with 2012 at all, but got a lot to do with much closer times to it completely.
Probably a good time for a dark retreat, find yourself a nice cellar.
You wouldn't have any option on the matter anyway.
Yeah.
But on the sunspot, to my humble opinion, the most important and the most dangerous thing that we are facing is the sunspots and the sun flares that come from them, because every 10 to 11 years, the number of sunspots on the sun rises from 0, which it was in 2008, to over 400. That's in an 11-year cycle. So the sunspots don't affect the Earth, but the solar flares and the other associated activity result in an increased number of electrons and protons with ultraviolet and X-rays, which create what we call the solar wind directed at the Earth. And without the Earth's magnetic field and radiation, obviously, to protect us, that radiation could fry us, literally. And sunspot cycle 24, which is expected next year, could be one of the strongest in centuries.
Yeah, no, they've got the wires too. I mean, we have this massive grid on the planet, which are all antenna, to pick up all this huge influx of energy, and if we don't have a way of gearing that down very quickly, or some kind of capacitor system or something on them, we definitely aren't going to have a grid.
Yeah. And, a lot of people point back to the famous solar storm of 1859, nearly 150 years. Is it 150 years ago? It is 150 years, and just about when was it? I think it was in August or September of 1859. There was a massive solar storm, and as you say, the telegraph wires, for instance, in the U.S. and Europe, which were only 15 years old at that time and very, very limited, they burned out, and there was a huge collapse, in communications. But of course, that's nothing to what we have today. And if you compare, say, a modern storm like the one that hit Canada in 1989, 21 years ago, then that was much less in intensity than the one in 1859. But there were four major events that made the 1859 storm significant. And if that kind of storm hit us today, which, as I said, is very likely, there will be four things that we have to watch. The plasma blob that's ejected from the sun and hits the Earth, that's a bubble of hot gas, plasma. Mm-hmm. That blob of hot gas coming from the sun, if that hit the Earth, well, the one thing that would be really crucial is how fast was it coming. In 1859, it came extremely fast. So that's the second thing, the speed. The third thing is the magnetic field in that blob. If they were very intense, of course, it's going to affect us radically. And the last and fourth element was the magnetic field of the blob that came that time. If that were in the opposite direction to the Earth, then of course we have more problems. But in those years, the telegraph was only 15 years into place. There was no satellites, no satellite TV, no bank ATM machines, no orbiting stations, and no power grids. Mm-hmm. So obviously, it's believed that if a storm similar to 1859, which, as I said, is highly likely to recur, in this solar cycle, the mind boggles with what would happen. In 1859, the sunlight doubled at the region of the flare, so you could see a huge increase in intensity, apparently, at the time when the flare occurred.
It does definitely seem the sun is, I think it's a hydrogen-helium mix, and it's shifted. And I know quite a while ago in my youth, I used to look up at the sun, and it had kind of a yellow or orange tint to it. And now it's just white. It's
right.
It's a whole different, seems to be putting out a whole different light spectrum
than it did light,
earlier.
Well, I know that would be, as I said, in probably in 2011, we could experience the height of this solar radiation, and if we did, we could expect massive disruptions of everything on Earth. The Meditech Corporation over on the East Coast did a study of this, and it said that if a storm like the major one of 1859 occurred, that the entire electrical grid of North America would be radically affected. Maybe it would be disabled entirely, and drinkable water supplies would be disrupted within several hours, as we depend so much on electricity for that as for everything else. Perishable foods and medicines would be gone in between 12 to 24 hours, and then sewage services, phone services, fuel systems would obviously all be affected as well. And they think, and this is a very sober study, that the outages could take months to fix. And you know what that would do? What would your local supermarket be like if there was no supplies, and if banks would probably have to close because they depend so much on the internet and the web, etc. trade with foreign countries might have to cease for a long time. So we don't, we don't have to think of some mysterious spiritual scenario to create problems. I mean, there are enough potentials in the mere physical world we live in that could cause enormous problems to us, which we haven't adverted to, because we've got used to living in a fairly tranquil time. Now, the worst thing we could do